We were the only ones in the locker room. The air still held steam from the showers, and the harsh fluorescent, long shadows were cast by lights between the metal lockers. After another cruel practice, I was cleaning up when my friend Maeve put me in a tight spot between the equipment racks and the ice tubs. I'm Renly Castro, the assistant, strength trainer for the women's football team of the Manila Valky. I have been inseparable from Maeve for 8 years, housemates in college, training partners, and now co-workers in the workplace. She is both the team's star forward and captain. My name is the lady who maintains her physical fitness after suffering a devastating ACL injury during my own playing career. Our relationship was forever altered by what transpired next. With her eyes burning, Maeve pushed me back against the chilly metal lockers, with something that I had spent years pretending not to see. On either side, she flattened her palms against the locker of my brain and muttered remarks that broke all the boundaries I had established in my career. She kissed me after that, not at all a friendly kiss or an unintentional lip brush. 8 years of burial and a genuine kiss that tasted like desperation. Sensations. My meticulously planned world burst into pieces in that instant. My employment was on the line. She might lose her job. The team's hopes of winning the championship were on the line. Yet as her lips pressed against mine, I became aware that I had been deceiving myself about our true nature. The duration of the kiss was approximately 10 seconds. The repercussions would not go away. This was wrong according to every rule I followed. It came out of every fiber of my being. I had the right idea. Secure your seatbelt. Prepare by subscribing in order to receive a unique surprise tomorrow. The sound of my feet on damp concrete reverberated throughout the locker room. 23. I was still here, carefully cleaning the equipment at minute 9. As the last remnants of steam from the showers dissolved into the harsh fluorescent light, I did this every day. All of the practices concluded in the same way. Approach. Make a list of the tape supplies, clean the treatment tables, and check the levels of the ice maker and make sure all the equipment was stored correctly. Without thinking, my fingers moved as fresh athletic tape was wound into tidy rolls. Accuracy, structure, and mastery. They are, after my ACL injury and playing career ended 2 years ago, things had become my pillars. The initial level of occurred in my senior year of college. A strange mishap during what ought to have been a standard procedure. Drill it. 8 months later, the attempt at a comeback lasted precisely 14 minutes before, once more, and this time permanently, my knee gave out. I have a habit of touching scars through compression leggings. Seemed unable to shatter. In a way, the tissue felt harder now, as if my body had developed armor where it once did. Be susceptible. Clinically precise explanations of the medical details were given by Dr. Martinez. A frontal tear, meniscus damage, cruciate ligament, and prolonged rehabilitation are needed. How about he was unable to describe how to reestablish one's identity when one's entire existence had been characterized by motion and emotion, of grass beneath your cleats, and the gratifying sound of the ball hitting your foot. The adoption of sports science, and even though it seemed like a consolation prize, coaching had made sense. I plunged into my studies, protocol for biomechanics, injury prevention, and rehabilitation with the same. I used to save my intensity for honing my accuracy when passing. I started playing into the field of knowledge. Tonight's post-practice data was shown on my tablet. Heart rate recovery, sprint durations, and hydration levels for every performer. As I navigated through the metrics, I kept seeing the same name. May Alonso is the team's star forward and captain. My roommate from college and now an 8-year acquaintance turned into a nightmare for my career. She had good recovery numbers. Well, better than good. Over the previous month, she had a 2% improvement in her sprint times, and her injury risk evaluation sat in the green space with ease. This compulsive observation, I told myself, was exclusively professional. Player well-being was to be monitored by assistant strength coaches. That I was able to mention the components of Maeve's favorite recovery smoothie, and the way she tied her cleats was just meticulous. Get ready. My analysis was cut off by the sound of cleats hitting concrete. Maeve was approaching me when I looked up, her kit bag slung over one shoulder, and, after the shower, her hair was still damp. She and the rest of the team were supposed to have left 20 minutes ago. I'm still here? Coach, Cuba, in order to preserve professional boundaries, she asked using the official title we had created. Her vocalization possessed a playful edge that brought back memories of our time together in college, when she used to make fun of my compulsive study habits. Examine the equipment. Without raising my gaze from my tablet, I answered, someone needs to ensure that you athletes don't ruin everything that we. She laughed. Give you? And the sound reverberated off the metal lockers, tightening something in my chest. Am I correct? Because my destructive tendencies with resistance bands and ice packs are well known. At last, I looked at her accurately. There was a slight shift in her weight to her left ankle, which most people would not notice. Humans would miss it. However, I had been researching Maeve for 8 years and athletic movement patterns for 2 years. I put down my tablet and said, ankle, you were tackled hard in the 63rd minute. How is the mobility? Her face changed from amused to resigned. Don't worry. Ren, a tiny bit. Stiff. Be seated. I indicated the treatment table that I had just cleaned. Please allow me to check it out. It's really nothing. When the game was over, I iced it. Maeve, using the voice that didn't argue, the coaching voice. She obeyed. Sitting, lifting, she gently went onto the cushioned table, confirming my suspicions. I put on new shoes, putting on examination gloves, and proceeded to examine her ankle, while keeping the clinical distance that had become ingrained in her. Point and flex, I told her, using one hand to support her foot and the other to feel the joint. The thin material of her socks allowed her skin to stay warm, and I could sense a slight swelling around the lateral. Malus, I inquired, pain level, while lightly pressing to gauge the range of action. 3 points out of 10. As I turn it clockwise, there might be 4. I made a nod, making mental notes. Sprain of grade 1. You'll have to ice it tonight and tomorrow morning, but nothing major. For 15 minutes, $15 off. Before Tuesday's practice, I'll record it. Once more, Dr. Castro strikes. Her voice was quiet. I glanced up because of something in her tone. She had an expression on her face as she observed me. Her dark eyes mirrored the harsh fluorescent lighting, making it difficult to read. We got so close that I smelled her shampoo. There was something zesty that brought back memories of our late-night study sessions in our shared dorm room. Just doing my job, I asked, taking a step back to take off my gloves. Was that what this is? She queried. Just a job, was the query that hovered between us like a difficult task. I occupied myself by cleaning my hands at the little sink next to the glove disposal. Location of treatment. It's my job. Of course, I work as support staff. And you're a player. Look at me. Ren. She said my name as if it were a question. That's how professional sports teams operate. I turned. She was sitting on the edge of the table, her injured ankle hanging down, and we kept the distance between us in the treatment room. Her expression was slightly serious, causing my stomach to knot. She said, I'm treating your minor ankle injury. Nothing's happening. Based on standard procedures. I don't mean that. You know it. I knew it. Perhaps I had known it for months. Longer. The way she kept her hand on the water bottles I passed her during practice. The way she made excuses to remain late while I was still working. The way her smiles made my heart race. A reaction I've documented and dismissed it as lingering anxiety from my career change. I started. But in 3 swift steps, she slid off the treatment table and crossed the room between us. Stay acting like that, she said, leaning me against the equipment storage section. I've been your friend, teammate, whatever you call it, for 8 years, Ren, and I can no longer pretend. That's sufficient. My back struck the metal shelves, causing the supplies to vibrate a little. Her breath warmed my face as I got close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Maeve, please don't. Even to my own ears, my voice sounded strangled when she spoke. Don't tell me that I wake up thinking about you every morning. Don't acknowledge that the reason I took that, not for the contract or the chances to win a championship, but because you were, in this instance. She firmly held me in place by pressing her hands flat against the metal shelves on either side of my head. It felt more like home than it should have. Don't say that I've been in love with you since you helped me study for organic chemistry all night long during our sophomore year of college. Stop, despite the fact that you had your own test the following day. The phrase was scarcely a whisper, or don't claim that it was the most lovely and moving thing to watch you recover from your injury. She leaned closer, and I saw the most heartbreaking thing I've ever seen. That your strength made me fall even further. I could sense the warmth emanating from her body, and every sensible idea in my mind cried out cautions regarding professional boundaries and committing suicide in my career, but my body lied to me by embracing her closeness. I love you, Ren, she said, whispered into my ear. I adore your absurd fixation on flawless tape jobs and your rest counting technique. Intervals allowed. I adore that you remember everyone's birthdays and their go-to recuperation foods. Instead of seeing bodies as tools to be used, you see them as puzzles to solve. Could answer. Before I could gather my defenses or quote the fraternization sections of the employee handbook, her lips met mine, and at first the kiss was tentative and gentle, as if she were asking permission. After I aired and kissed her back, our long-suppressed feelings erupted. She had a distinct flavor from the sports drink she had been drinking, which I had been able to detect for longer than I wanted to acknowledge. I tried not to notice. Without her conscious consent, my hands found her waist, pulling, even though my mind was screaming about all the things this kiss could ruin her contract. My job, the team chemistry, our friendship, and everything we had put so much effort into creating. When we finally parted ways, we were both breathing heavily, and she closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against mine. "Tell me you felt that," she muttered, her hands still resting against the shelves behind me. "Tell me I'm not considering this connection." I should have lied, shoved her away, and read out Section 12 of the Employee Handbook regarding the romantic relationships between athletes and staff. Instead, I opened my mouth in panic, thinking, this can't happen. This is not possible, she said, slipping sideways out of her embrace. Her expression instantly and tragically changed, the hope in her eyes fading and being replaced by something. "Ren, please just talk to me." That looked dangerously close to heartbreak. "No." I backed toward the exit, grabbing my tablet and clipboard while trembling. This was an error, a sign of weakness, and it won't occur again. Even to me, the words sounded phony. "I'm being professional. I'm running away. I'm a support staff member, and you're an athlete in my care. I could lose my job because of the rules, Mave, and protocols. Might lose your contract. The team might suffer. Screw the rules," she said, trailing me to the locker room. "Get out. How about what we desire? How do we feel?" I placed my hand on the push bar as I paused at the door, and she was still in her practice, standing in the center of the empty locker room, and I made myself take another look at her. Kit, her lips slightly swollen from our kiss, her hair tangled from my fingers. I pushed, "What's professional matters, not how I feel," through the door and made my way swiftly to the parking lot. Fumbling for my car keys with shaking hands, I heard the door to the locker room slam behind me, and the sound reverberated through the drive home went by quickly, and the empty hallway felt like a period at the end of a sentence. I wasn't prepared to finish. I could still taste her on my lips and feel her warm hands against my lips as I looked at streetlights and moments that were replayed. The reverberating intensity of the locker room made my apartment feel too quiet, and I ended up staring at my reflection in the microwave door in the kitchen. I appeared to have just committed the biggest error of her life, but I wasn't sure if I should have kissed her or turned away. A text message buzzed on my phone, and I typed back a response about work going well, but my heart leaped before I realized it was just my mother inquiring about my week and routines, maintaining a busy schedule, and other everyday activities that seemed unreal in the wake of what had transpired. I lay in bed going over damage control and emergency procedures because it was impossible. Techniques, attempting to determine how to deal with Maeve at tomorrow's practice. We would need to act as though nothing had occurred. My chest ached at the idea that we would have to return to clinical interactions and professional distance. Was entirely related to the way she had prayed as she whispered my name, and had nothing to do with sports injuries. Arrived at the training center 45 minutes early, but not early enough to avoid any chance encounters before I had had enough coffee to face the day. I arrived at the locker room a few minutes early, appeared exactly as it had 12 hours prior. But a basic change had moved between the treatment tables and metal lockers. I was rearranging the medical equipment for the third time that footsteps signaled the approach of someone. And I knew it was Maeve without having to look up because I had committed it to memory. When we were in college, we could hear her gate opening and recognize her approach from a distance of 20 meters. "We need to talk," she said, without introducing myself. I proceeded to line up the antiseptic wipes in tidy rows, nothing to say. "I'm working. Look at me. Ren, I'm working? Last night was a mistake that won't happen again." She stepped closer, and I smelled that citrus shampoo once more. "Just take a look at me." I looked up into her eyes against my better judgment, and she appeared to have not slept either, with dark circles enveloping her. Normally bright-eyed, she wore the same practice kit from yesterday. She whispered, "Tell me you felt nothing. Tell me that kiss didn't mean anything to you, and I'll back off. I'll never mention it again." Now was my opportunity. I could keep both of our careers safe with just one lie, a single denial, and we could return to the security of business partnerships. It had no significance. I uttered, my words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was unprofessional conduct triggered by proximity and post-game adrenaline. "It won't." She looked at me for a long time, searching my face for something I couldn't give her. And then, at last, Coach understood. She gave a single, sharp nod that seemed to express both acceptance and disappointment. "Castro, I'll see you at practice," she said, using my official title like armor. She turned and left me alone with my neatly arranged medical supplies and the expanding certainty that I had just lied to the most important person. Within an hour, the rest of the team showed up, with their typical energy and chatter. I threw myself into my work, making sure every player was okay. Metrics, modifying training loads, and closely observing recovery procedures. I took a clinically precise approach when it came time to tape Maeve's ankle, and she sat on the treatment table in silence as I applied neat overlapping athletic tape strips to the joint, my hands remaining steady. I had perfect technique and kept a perfect professional distance. But when my fingers hovered for a fraction of a second longer than needed as I finished and pressed the last strip of tape into place, she drew in a sharp breath that had nothing to do with pain. So I knew she noticed when it touched her skin or stress. All set, I said, taking a swift step back. Ice tonight, and let me. Thank you, coach, she answered. But something in her eyes said, know if you experience any increased swelling or pain. Completely different. I discovered that my hands were indeed shaking as she left to join the team warm-up. The week turned into a strategic avoidance exercise, and I got to the training center 30 minutes early and remained for 40 minutes later, arranging my schedule to have as little interaction with Maeve as possible. I went above and beyond what was absolutely required for my job. When the team required injury assessments or recovery treatments, I tasked our junior trainer Marcus with taking care of Maeve. Castro, are you able to take? During Thursday's practice, Coach Rivera brought attention to Alonso's hamstring flexibility. Marcus can. Without taking my eyes off my clipboard, I answered, handle that. He needs the experience with our more seasoned players. Despite his perplexed expression, Marcus jogged over to where Maeve was stretching close to the goalposts, and I observed he used my peripheral vision to perform the same flexibility tests that I had done hundreds of times. Observing the slight Ma's stance of frustration when she realized I had given someone else responsibility for her care. Otherwise, I maintained a professional distance through careful scheduling and delegation, and this became my new normal. The team handbook was clear about relationships, so I told myself that this was safer and better for our careers, between employees and athletes, and I'd invested too much time in reestablishing my professional identity to take that chance. Feelings I couldn't afford, but I couldn't keep a close eye on Maeve's recovery because I was avoiding her. I discovered that I was compulsively monitoring her statistics on my tablet and comparing her performance metrics with something was wrong with the data I had gathered over the previous 18 months. Her sprint over the previous week, her agility scores indicated a 3% decrease in lateral movement efficiency. Most worryingly, her injury risk assessment had changed from green to yellow, indicating a higher likelihood of joint or muscle strain. Coach Rivera's voice said, Ren, we need to talk. During Friday's post-practice review, she interrupted my analysis, and I followed her into her office while holding my tablet tightly, as a shield against my chest. Maria Rivera had 15 years of experience coaching women's football, and her ability to read both game situations and people made her look intimidating in the best possible way. Sit, she said, making a gesture. I don't think I understand the question, but she pointed to the chair across from her desk. What's up with Alonso? Throughout the week, her performance has been deteriorating. She has been missing passes and reacting more slowly. May take hits she wouldn't normally take while she's sleeping. You're our expert in injury prevention. What's your evaluation? I accessed Maeve's data on my tablet, thankful to have quantifiable figures to talk about instead of. Her metrics reveal a decline in performance across several categories, including the emotional turmoil I had been attempting to ignore, I said, looking at the charts. Agility scores, sprint speed down 3%. The reason behind her movement patterns, elevated stress indicators, and below baseline. Professional protocol required me to report any factors that could affect player performance, which was the question I had been dreading. However, how was I supposed to explain that our star forward was having trouble since I had kissed her and fled like a, I said, coward. It might be cumulative fatigue from our increased training load, or lingering consequences from her ankle injury from last week. I advise adding more recovery sessions and lowering the intensity of her practice. Coach Rivera examined me using the same. Has she told you anything about her personal problems or family? She used to analyze the weaknesses of the other team with great intensity. Issues, relationship worries. Despite my attempts to stay calm, my face heated. Players don't usually talk about personal issues with support. We keep professional boundaries. Staff, correct? Her voice indicated that she wasn't totally sure. I want you to, as our captain and top scorer, she deserves a thorough evaluation, a full physical movement analysis, and the works. Marcus has been managing her treatments this week, so I need to know if anything is affecting her performance. Maybe he ought to go on. No. Coach Rivera's face grew stern. You are, Castro. You are the greatest at what you do, which is why I hired you. Alonso receives all of your attention until we determine what's. I understood the irony. I had been avoiding Maeve in order to preserve our business relationship. But now I was ordered to get back in close communication because my avoidance was impacting her performance, which in turn affected the team's success. I stayed late that night in order to review and update training procedures, injury prevention techniques. The facility was deserted, save for the sound of the night security guard, As I was immersed in biomechanical analysis, I heard the sound of the janitorial staff in the hallways far away. As I looked at my watch, I noticed the sound of cleats on concrete coming from the main training area. Since nobody should be training at this hour, especially not by themselves, it was almost 10 o'clock. I retrieved my emergency medical. As I imagined the worst, my heart rate spiked as I jogged toward the sound. Case scenarios. Maeve was running agility drills on the practice field and the emergency lights were dim, and she was moving incorrectly, sort of favoring her left side. That implied restitution for discomfort or dysfunction. She cut as I watched, abruptly slid around a training cone and fell to one knee, letting out a gasp that echoed throughout the empty field. Training took over, and I ran across the grass while my medical kit bounced on my hip and reached her in under 30 seconds. "Don't move," I ordered, lowering myself to the ground next to her. "Where's the pain?" "Right hip," she said, gritting her teeth. Sharp, like something pulled. As I assisted her in rolling onto her back on the artificial turf, my hands moved automatically to check for hip flexor injuries. Strain caused by exhaustion and whatever compensatory pattern had been evolving throughout the week. "What were you considering?" "At night, training by yourself," I inquired while feeling the muscle group to assess the degree of strain. "This is precisely how severe injuries occur. I needed to practice cutting." I tested her range of motion and she whimpered. "My timing has been off all week." When I said, "The timing is off because you're pushing through dysfunction instead of addressing it," I reached into, "This hip flexor strain is grade 2, and you'll need my anti-inflammatory gel kit. Be absent for at least a week, and possibly longer if you don't give it enough rest." A week. She attempted to sit up, but I put, "Don't move. I need to administer treatment before the swelling goes away." Keep her lying down with a firm hand on her shoulder. Worse, I applied gel to my hands while working in the dim emergency lighting. I leaned close, my face inches from hers, and started rubbing it into the afflicted muscle group. I tried to improve circulation and decrease inflammation. "I'm to blame for this," I muttered I ought to have noticed the compensation pattern sooner and kept an eye on your movement more closely. You've been avoiding me all week." "Ren," her remarks made with her hand still on her hip. I could see her observing me in the low light, her face displaying a mixture of pain and something more profound. "I've been maintaining professional distance," I said, returning to maybe applying more pressure than is necessary during the massage. "Is that what you call it?" My palms felt the warmth of the gel as I worked into her skin. For me, physical therapy had always been a form of meditation, an opportunity to concentrate on anatomy and function rather than feelings and complications. However, even in a medical setting, touching Maeve's body prevented me from preserving the emotional distance I had been meticulously building. "Mahala," I muttered, before I could stop her. Her breath caught, and I realized what I had said. My words slipped out into Gaelic. The words I'd never said to anyone romantically were whispered by my grandmother when she tucked me in as a child, because I had never been certain that I could love like that. "What did you just say?" Maeve whispered. I could tell lies. Say that the statement had no meaning and was something I said out of habit while focused. But her hip flexor required 20 more minutes of care, and with my hands actually on her body, I was unable to dodge her inquiries. I confessed, "I love you." My voice could hardly be heard over the emergency lighting's hum. For so long, she was silent, long enough to make me question whether she had misheard me. I kept massaging, carefully rubbing my way through the muscle fibers, pretending that my world hadn't suddenly changed. "Then why have you been acting as though I possessed something communicative?" When she did, she asked, "You do?" After all, I relocated to work on an alternative project, part of the stress, my clinical background. Fighting the emotional turmoil of this discussion. "You're quite infectious, in a manner that could ruin all of my hard work. I'm here, Ren." I lifted my gaze to hers, but I continued the treatment. Her face was inches from mine, so near that I could, even in the low light, she was able to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She inquired, "What are you so afraid of?" I had been keeping it carefully locked in my chest, but the question opened it. "Everything," was my honest response. "I'm worried about losing my job, being viewed as unprofessional, and the team suffering because we were unable to maintain our personal sentiments distinct from those of the workplace." "Any other ideas?" Her tenacity pushed me to be more honest than I was comfortable with. I confessed, "I'm afraid I don't know how to do this. Never in my life have I fallen in love with a woman. Never in my life have I loved someone so much. I have no idea how to avoid making a mistake or what the expectations are. What more?" With my hands motionless on her hip, I closed my eyes. "I fear that you'll see that I'm not worth the chance, that I am simply the damaged athlete who failed to succeed as a player, who has centered her entire identity on taking. She couldn't take care of her own body, so she took care of other people's." Maeve was watching me when I opened my eyes, with a look of tenderness that made my heart hurt. "You're a fool," she said quietly. "That isn't very encouraging. You're a fool if you believe that your worth is determined by your abilities on the field rather than your character. You're a fool if you believe that I fell in love with someone who reached up to touch my face, her fingers following the line of my jaw. You not because you're smart, kind, and stronger than anyone I know, but because you were a fantastic midfield player." "No," I felt myself leaning into her as her thumb touched my bottom lip. Touch in spite of every sensible warning. "You're a fool if you believe that caring for others is—" I wanted to kiss her once more and get closer to her, but it felt somehow less important than scoring goals or winning titles. Between us and disregard professional limits and the repercussions for one's career. The desire was so intense that it felt like a physical pull, similar to gravity acting backwards. Rather, I made myself sit back, cutting off our contact. "Your hip flexor needs ice," I said. "My 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off for the next 48 hours. Unsteady voice. She looked disappointed, but she didn't object when I assisted her in sitting and then provided support. Her weight while standing up. "Are you able to walk?" I inquired, keeping the clinical distance that seemed to be getting more and more man-made. With assistance, I supported her by putting her arm around my shoulders. As we moved slowly in the direction of the locker room, her weight pressed against mine with every step. Her citrusy shampoo filled my senses with memories of our kiss, and warmth seeped through my coaching shirt. I assisted her into the treatment table in the locker room and made an ice pack, covering it with a thin towel before I put it over the injured muscle. I set a timer on my phone and said, 15 more minutes, and you can go home. Training for the remainder of this week. I will create a modified rehabilitation program that you can begin on Monday. We're not done talking. Ren, as I turned to go, she grabbed my wrist. The timer ticked as I glanced down at her hand on my arm. Her fingers heated against my skin. It must be. No, it doesn't, loudly during our shared silence, calculating the minutes until she could depart and I could return to, pretended that feelings I couldn't manage weren't upending my life. But as I observed her face, observed the resolve in her face, and the way she wouldn't let go of my hand in the harsh fluorescent lighting, wrist, I came to the conclusion that avoidance was no longer a practical approach. The fear that came with acknowledging that I wanted something I wasn't gone. But the conversation was, the timer finally rang, and we both looked surprised as if we had forgotten it was there. I took out the ice pack and examined the region, noting with expert satisfaction that the swelling had already started to go down. Coach Castro, I understand. Better, I said, assisting her to get down from the table, but no training until Monday. She walked slowly but steadily toward the exit, and when she reached the doorway, she turned back to face me again. I believe you're worth every risk, she said, and then she left, leaving me in the void. The reverberation of her words and the increasing realization that I was engaged in a battle I had already lost in the locker room. The treatment plan I created for Maeve's hip flexor strain was medically, her injury had healed in 5 days, but it was sound and totally unnecessary. Citing the need for thorough muscle rebalancing and movement pattern analysis, I extended the treatment period to 2 weeks. Coach Rivera trusted my knowledge of injuries and approved the extended timeline without question. Prevention, but she was unaware that those private therapy sessions had evolved into something else. I guided Maeve's leg through a battery of flexibility tests in the empty room and remarked, range of motion looks good. Rehabilitation room. Sunlight was streaming in at 7:00 a.m. An hour before the rest of the team arrived, warming the typically medical area through the windows. Does it? She inquired, observing my face rather than the motion, because it feels like you're being very thorough today. As I supported her leg, my hand stayed on her longer than was necessary, my thumb making tiny circles on her skin. Sometime between our third session and the time she began showing up early, the professional justification had vanished. I want to make sure there is no residual dysfunction, I said, lowering her legs, simply to spend the stolen time together. Gradually, keeping in touch for longer than any valid evaluation calls for. As I moved to check her hip alignment, my palms raised the question. That's what we're calling this. Putting pressure on her pelvis in a way that was both personal and medical. She was resting on her back on the treatment table while sporting a sports bra and compression shorts, and I was feigning an elevated heart rate was not a result of her gaze on me, but rather of her professional focus. Raise your knee to 90 degrees, I instructed, even though we had already completed this test the day before and yesterday. She obeyed, and I was able to get close enough to her by placing one hand on her thigh and the other on her lower leg. Ren, she uttered, smelling her skin, warm and fresh from her procession shower. Her face was inches from mine when I looked up, and this time I didn't back down. The kiss was different, slower, more methodical, as though we were now allowed to examine what we had been. She denied this, placing her hand on the nape of my neck. and running her fingers through my hair, and I embraced the touch without considering the repercussions or professional boundaries. When we broke, I laid my forehead against hers, and we both breathed more forcefully than the mild movement exercise called for. I muttered, "This is dangerous." "I know," she said, tracing her thumb circles on my neck. But I don't seem to mind. Our moments of stealth turned into a routine, longer than medically required early morning treatment sessions, text messages regarding recovery procedures with concealed meanings, lingering gestures during team exercises that might be written off as professional interaction that felt more like promises. The team's performance significantly improved, and we won our next. Maeve's stats returned to their typical high level after 3 games, and Coach Rivera gave me praise for my recuperation efforts, expressing satisfaction with my ability to address the underlying movement dysfunction, as well as the injury that had been hindering her ability to play. If only she understood that the actual treatment was unrelated to hip flexor mobility, and Maeve's smile every morning when she saw me was the reason for everything. "Your recovery numbers are remarkable," I stated as I was looking through her wellness data on my tablet during our Friday session. "Heart rate variability is optimal, stress indicators are low, and the quality of sleep is outstanding." "What could be producing such beneficial changes?" she stated while lying on the treatment table and feigning to concentrate on. I retorted that her stretching regimen must be the all-encompassing strategy for recovery, noting the tablet to help her reposition herself. "Holistic treatment plans frequently yield superior results compared to isolated. Very scientific," she muttered as my hands led her through a hip flexor. I had to lean over her in order to perform the stretch, which allowed me to create a private canopy in the sunny room. I said, "I believe in evidence-based practice, but the evidence that most intrigued me was the way she breathed, caught when my fingers touched her inner thigh's delicate skin." "What does the evidence indicate about our current course of treatment?" I looked directly into her eyes and saw mischief and a deeper reflection that it's generating the desired results and ought to be carried on indefinitely. She chuckled. "You have a bright, unguarded sound that made my chest feel too small to hold the emotions that were growing inside of it. I adore your scientific method of handling everything." The word love struck me like a blow to the body, even used informally. We had been circling the more profound ramifications of our relationship, concentrating on the instant gratification of stolen kisses and intimate moments, but love also meant plans and futures, and the sort of emotional commitment that made me feel afraid. "I think we should wrap up your session. The team will be here shortly," I said, taking a step back to establish professional distance. She noticed my retreat and sat upright on the treatment table and examined my face with the same fervor she usually used to read rival teams' defensive tactics. The question I had been avoiding hung between us like a challenge. Were we participating in a covert relationship that was against the law? Every professional boundary I had worked so hard to build over the past 2 years, risking our careers for fleeting moments in rehabilitation facilities, descending further into an unresolved situation. "I'm not sure," I said. "You're scared of us falling in love. So do it," she said, slipping off the table to stand in front of me. Before I could react, the voices in the hallway signaled that other team members had arrived. I hurried to. As Maeve gathered her towel and water bottle, I packed up my equipment, and we both transitioned smoothly into professional mode. "The hip feels much better," she said loudly enough for anyone to hear. "Good session, Castro. I'll reassess your progress next week," I said in my coaching voice. "But as you continue with the at-home workout program," as she passed me on her way to the door, her hand touched mine in a way that seemed to be a promise. And I recognized our conversation was far from over, and the team noticed a change in our dynamic, not in the way I had hoped. Feared, the other players made remarks about Maeve's improved relationship, instead of harboring suspicions about unsuitable partnerships. Attitude and sharpened concentration during practice. A number of teammates made jokes about whatever had lifted their captain's spirits, citing everything from improved exercise habits to sleeping patterns. Sophia, our midfielder, during a team meeting after practice, "Coach Castro, whatever you did to correct her movement patterns, could you share it with the rest of us in a bottle?" Heat rose in my cheeks, but I was still able to react appropriately. A thorough rehabilitation takes into account more than just the initial injury. Maeve was careful to, according to the guidelines, extremely careful. Maeve concurred. However, even though her tone was ideal, and there was something in her face that made my heart race, the attention made me acutely conscious of each encounter. Look, an expert touch that maybe read as more. I began meticulously recording our therapy sessions, producing. If someone questioned my methods, I could provide documentation to support the prolonged rehabilitation period. Can I get a few minutes with you, Coach Castro? I looked up, fearing that the scrutiny was coming from an unexpected place, From my post-practice gear inventory to meet sports reporter Rebecca Santos, standing in the equipment room doorway. From the biggest newspaper in the city, Rebecca had been reporting on women's football for 5 years and was known for his in-depth research and incisive inquiries. Of course, I replied, but my stomach knotted up in fear right away. How may I assist you? I'm composing an article regarding the group's recent success, she stated, removing a tiny recording device. In particular, the impact of injury prevention and sports science on athlete performance piques my interest. Would you mind if I captured our discussion? I nodded, despite all of my instincts screaming warnings. What would you'd like to know? Rebecca remarked. Your rehabilitation work with May Alonso has been particularly noteworthy. Examining her notes, over the last few weeks, she has undergone a remarkable transformation. Would you mind taking me through your therapeutic strategy? The inquiries began innocently enough, with technical information regarding hip flexor injuries, recuperation schedules, the combination of mobility exercises and strength training, answered with clinical accuracy, appreciative of the well-known field of biomechanics and evidence-based practice. But then Rebecca's inquiries changed. You and Alonzo were in college. My research indicated that they were roommates. So I said, coaches, right? We've been friends for 8 years. How does your personal background impact your career, relationship now? I had my doubts, but it doesn't. I uphold the same professional standards with every athlete in my care, irrespective of their individual background. However, there's undoubtedly a degree of mutual respect and understanding that results from that long-term partnership. Some coaches may contend that I felt caught between honesty and self-preservation, and I knew that familiarity could erode objectivity. Professional development and moral principles guarantee that interpersonal relationships don't get in the way of clinical judgment. I only consider medical evaluation and evidence-based procedures when making treatment decisions. Rebecca took notes while nodding. The group has had great success since Alonso's return to form. Some may argue that your rehabilitation efforts were the key to their victory. I responded that a variety of factors contribute to team success, including coaching, player, commitment, team dynamics, and conditioning regimens. I play a minor role in all of these of the equation, but it's a crucial component, particularly when it comes to your star player. Her tone made, Rebecca was observing me with the look of someone who could see a story hidden beneath the surface, and I looked up sharply. Are you asking about something specific? I asked, simply curious about the dynamics of working so closely with. The phrase struck a chord because it must be difficult to manage boundaries with someone you have such a long personal history with. A physical strike. Managing boundaries, exactly what I had been failing at for weeks. I told all athletes that I maintain proper professional boundaries, but my tone sounded. Rebecca took more notes before shutting off her recording device, which was strained even to my own ears. Thank you for your time. The article should appear next week. Coach Castro. Following her departure, I sat looking at my hands and repeating every word of the conversation in the empty equipment room. The questions had felt as though Rebecca had a suspicion without hard proof, like a fishing trip. However, how long did suspicion turn into an investigation? How long did it take someone to notice the lengthy treatment sessions, or the way Maeve and I called Maeve that night and asked her to meet me at a coffee shop after we had exchanged glances during rehearsal. This has to stop, I stated without introducing myself. Downtown, away from the training facility and any possible oversight. When we were sitting in a booth in a corner, she looked up from her menu, and the smile that had been there was replaced by confusion. What has to stop this? She said when she first saw me. Regardless of what we're doing. I felt like I was swallowing glass fragments as a reporter questioned me today regarding our relationship. About boundary management. Someone will eventually make the connection. Maeve put down her menu and leaned back. I'm not running away, but I'm back in her seat. So, the moment things get complicated, we're back to this running away. The accusation hurt because it felt real. No, you're being a coward, being realistic about the consequences. I'm attempting to preserve our careers by ending something that brings us both joy, and by acting as though we don't give a damn about each other, by realizing that our desires and our capabilities are not the same. I made myself meet her gaze. She was silent for a while. This was a mistake, Maeve, a lovely mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. Looking at my face as though she was learning it by heart. What? I believe you're not afraid of losing your job, being afraid to live, and being afraid to pursue something that might not succeed. The words struck a chord with me. You'd rather give it up than risk discovering what could happen if you tried. Perhaps you're right, I said, slicing through all my logical defenses to reveal the underlying fear with surgical precision. Discreetly, however, fear does not alter the truth of our circumstances. Need to make any changes, we can be cautious and discreet. We can figure out a way to make this work. I shook my head. Live that way. Lying to our coworkers, sneaking around, and being afraid of being caught all the time. It's unfair to. What do you propose? Either of us. That we resume our friendship as coworkers who happen to have a personal history. Just friends, she repeated, and her tone seemed to imply a curse. Simply friends. She nodded slowly before getting up from the table. If that's what you want, it must be done. I suppose there's nothing more to say. What must happen? She grabbed her jacket and purse, left me sitting at the table by myself, with 2 unfinished cups of coffee and the expanding confidence that I had just committed the second biggest error of my life. After kissing her, leaving, but as I sat in the coffee shop, observing others go about their daily lives while mine collapsed all around me, I didn't see any other option. It was better to stop it now because the risks were too high and the consequences too terrible, even though the tidy conclusion felt better than allowing it to ruin everything we had both worked so hard to create. The playoffs came as a storm I had been watching for weeks, unavoidable, and it felt like tearing me in two, and damaging. Our matchup with the Metro City Sharks in the first semifinal was arranged for a Friday evening, and the whole week before it felt like navigating a minefield while pretending that nothing was wrong. Maeve and I had neither mastered the art of professional distance. Conquered, I sat on the other side of the room and concentrated on my tablet screen during team meetings. Instead of risking eye contact, I turned in my reports when Coach Rivera called for injury assessments. Alonso's body language reveals clipped clinical language that erased any traces of our intimacy. Optimal efficiency. As I reported in the strategy session on Wednesday, there are no restrictions on her current. I failed to disclose that I had been watching those movement patterns from across the field while training load tolerance. Because I no longer trusted myself to perform practical evaluations, I failed to mention that her sprint times had, as though channeling her, improved by an additional 2% since our coffee shop chat. Frustration into athletic performance. I didn't bring up the way she gazed at me in these meetings, such as, I was a stranger masquerading as someone she had known. The team realized something wasn't right. But I was unable to pinpoint exactly what. I observed the players during Thursday's last practice, prior to the semifinal. During my rehabilitation training, I developed interactions with the analytical eye. Communication styles where pass completion rates had dropped by % in the previous week. The majority of this team's natural chemistry, which had made them formidable, was breaking down in ways that weren't clear at first glance, but would become crucial when playoff pressure mounted. Castro, we must speak. Sophia, our seasoned, after practice. The midfielder cornered me. What's up with you and the captain? I'm not sure what you mean. But, come on, you two have been acting? I said, occupied with packing medical supplies to keep her from looking at me directly, like strangers the entire week. The team is being impacted by whatever personal drama is going on. The accusation struck, more difficult because it was real. My effort to safeguard our work environment by repressing my emotions was, there is no personal drama. I lied. I was causing just the kind of disturbance I had been trying to avoid. Captain Alonso, and I uphold proper professional boundaries. Sophia's face indicated she wasn't persuaded. But Coach Rivera called for a final team meeting across the locker room before she could reply. Reached the stadium, which had 12,000 seats, with the kind of cool autumn air that made everything feel more acute. And the crowd's energy produced a buzz that I usually found energizing. But instead I felt as though I was moving through water, each movement requiring deliberate effort. I reached the stadium 4 hours prior to kickoff, as per my standard procedure for player and equipment preparation. Wellness assessments. The locker room for the visiting team had an antiseptic and anxious vibe to it, so I set up my medical supplies with the same accuracy I'd applied since my first training session. Players started coming in 90 minutes prior to kickoff, and I performed pre-game evaluations using heart rates, mechanical efficiency. Everything is recorded, including joint mobility, muscle tension, and hydration levels, and examined in accordance with accepted practices. As Maeve walked into the tiny medical area appeared to thicken. She sat silently on the examination table, reaching out for the blood with her arms, 20/78. I declared, writing the pressure cuff with the cooperation of someone performing familiar movements, figures on her chart, within the typical range. What else? She inquired. Her, I responded. Range of motion assessment, in a professionally neutral tone, even though we both knew her mobility was ideal. I led her through hip rotation, shoulder flexion and extension, maintaining the clinical distance that had become our new standard when I tested her ankle dorsiflexion, but shoulder abduction while supporting her arm and rubbing my fingers against her skin. She took a sharp breath that had nothing to do with physical discomfort. Assessment complete, I said hastily, taking a back seat and taking unnecessary notes. No restrictions were found. After moving away from the table and toward the door, she stopped and placed her hand on the frame. Good luck tonight, coach, she said. Without looking back, she said, Castro. Good luck, Captain Alonso. The game got off to a good start. We scored in the 18th minute after Maeve converted a corner kick with the kind of accuracy that made it clear to everyone why she was regarded as one of the league's top forwards. At the half, we had a 2-1, and Coach Rivera's remarks at the half emphasized upholding defensive discipline and utilizing possibilities for transition. With my standard medical kit and communication headset, I observed from the sidelines levels of player fatigue and hydration. Prior to the 62nd minute, when a Sharks defender caught Maeve in the act of launching her into the advertising boards with a late challenge, she fell heavily, landing on. The audience gasped as she struck her left shoulder. I was in motion before the referee's whistle blew, blowing, my medical background triumphing over all personal issues as I dashed onto the field. Do not move, I said, lowering myself to my knees next to her. Where is the agony? By her shoulder, she said with clenched teeth. Ren, something isn't right. My first name's Usajin. It should have raised professional red flags in front of 12,000 people, but all I could think about was how she was, both the strength of her face and her arm. I performed a quick evaluation, evaluating joint and range of motion, stability while the team doctor came jogging over from the bench. Grade of likely acroclavicular joint separation, 2 depending on her pain response and the mechanism of injury. Will you go on? Dr. Martinez, who had brought his own medical kit, inquired. No, I said right away. The doctor and Maeve both gave him a stern look. She requires immediate assessment and imaging. Continuing to play runs the risk of making this into a grade 3 separation or worse. Ren, please, softly, Maeve said. However, I had already signaled the stretcher team. My hand was on her as we assisted her in leaving the field, on her unhurt shoulder in what would appear to onlookers to be routine medical assistance. However, my thumb's way traced tiny circles across her skin. The way I leaned in to reassure her in a whisper that had nothing to do with clinical evaluation, how my mask of professionalism totally vanished when she was in pain. Those specifics were caught on all of the stadium's cameras. The game was a 4-2 loss for us, not including the team's chemistry deteriorated in ways that were painful to witness. Despite M's offensive threat and leadership, I utilized the last, spending half an hour with her in the medical room, keeping an eye on her shoulder and attempting to ignore the way she gazed at me as though I was the only thing that was stable in a world that had all of a sudden turned unpredictable. We'll get through this, I muttered as her ice pack was being adjusted. The words covered a lot more ground than just her shoulder injury. Will we? She said, as well as I had no response. On Monday, at 6:43, the anonymous email reached my inbox. Morning, 3 days after we lost in the semifinals, as stated in the subject line, professional conduct concern, and the brief and devastating message. I am writing to cite video evidence of improper behavior between player Malonza and assistant coach Renly Castro from Fridays. The game exhibits intimate behavior and unprofessional physical contact that are not consistent with standard medical. This relationship seems to be against league staffing policies, player interactions, and could potentially result in a conflict of interest that impacts the performance of the team. No signature. No identifying information. Just enough specifics to start a formal investigation and ruin everything I had worked so hard to build over the previous 2 years. Building? At midday, I found myself seated across from 3 officials I had never met in the league office conference room, attempting to clarify why the behavior I observed from various camera angles during M's shoulder injury treatment caught as unduly personal. Coach Castro, could you describe your relationship with Miss Alonso? Asked the lead investigator, a severe woman in her 50s whose face indicated she had already spoken to her. Professional conclusions. I answered, even though the word made my lips. I oversee the prevention of injuries and the recovery of all team members, including prolonged private sessions of treatment that go beyond the norm. My meticulously crafted defenses fell apart under official examination. The period of time I had given Maeve for rehabilitation looked, just as it was, a justification for spending time alone together. The documentation I had made to defend myself now appears to be proof of a single player's obsession. Every week I said, Miss Alonso's injury required comprehensive treatment, as well as the physical interaction that was seen during the game on Friday. A number of witnesses reported actions that seemed private as opposed to healthcare. Because there was no defense, I had none. Every professional boundary I had upheld vanished the instant M was hurt, and in its place was the kind of care that was beyond the scope of medical education. I expressed my concern for her well-being, saying that I was worried enough to breach professional conventions. After the investigation was over, I was suspended pending a thorough evaluation. I lost all access to team facilities and all communication with players as of right away. The final round of the championship was set for the next weekend, and I would stay at home and watch as the team I helped create tried to win. Without the medical assistance that I had given for 18 months, Thursday, the news was released. Good morning. Amid accusations of a relationship, Valky's coach was suspended, according to the headline in the sports section, with pictures of me touching Maeve's shoulder from Friday's game. With a clear tenderness, the article was written by Rebecca Santos, and her reporting was in-depth and damning. After the 15th call from reporters requesting comment, I switched off my phone. My apartment was silent and felt like a prison. Aside from the occasional car on the street below and the sound of my own breathing, for 2 years, my role on the team had become the foundation of my identity. I felt disconnected without that framework, which reminding me of the weeks following my second ACL surgery, when everything seemed equally uncertain. The squad lost the championship match 3-0. I observed from my sofa, taking note of every tactical. Had I been present to offer real-time injury assessments and medical support, that choice might have been different. It was obvious that Maeve's shoulder was compromised from playing through pain when she hobbled off the field in the 78th minute. I quickly regretted the violence and the loss of my security deposit after throwing my remote control at the wall. Text messages that I couldn't bring myself to read were buzzing nonstop on my phone. Voice messages left by colleagues, coworkers, and relatives who had watched the news coverage. But it was Maeve's calls that hurt the most. The woman's name kept showing up on my screen until I had to completely shut the device off. I paid the following week in seclusion, placing online grocery orders, and steer clear of any circumstance that would necessitate speaking with those who were aware of my story. It felt right to be quiet, like atonement for my conceit that I could be happy and successful in my career. The moment Maeve appeared, she had clearly seen my car, but I pretended not to be home when she arrived at my apartment door on Thursday night. Inside the parking area, after frantically calling my name for 5 minutes, she eventually left a handwritten note beneath my door. The note stated, "Running away won't change what happened. It won't alter our feelings about one another, and it will not ease any of this. I understand your pain, but excluding me hurts more than everything else put together." I went through the note 17 times before putting it in the folder containing my most important papers, alongside my work contracts and coaching certifications. After double locking my door, I went back to the couch, where the majority of my waking hours had been spent gazing at the wall, wondering how someone could want something so badly might result in losing everything that was important.